Oh, for real? You really missed 5 seconds. I thought you were messing with us. All right. Well, I guess we're just we're gonna hop on then right now. Although I will say, who does come up with the names for these things?
I don't know.
We need to get into this.
Yeah. So like Skylake, right, is clearly, I think, the end. I'm looking at the chart here, and it's sort of the end of creative names, I think, for the Intel chips, because before that it was Haswell and Broadwell, and then there was like Sandy Bridge and Ivy Bridge and Halem and Tigerton and all these cool things, and then they're like, well, the Lake thing is working out pretty well for us, right? So let's go like Skylake, Kaby Lake, Coffee Lake, Cannon Lake, right? And then what after that? How about Ice Lake? Okay. Where are you going with that? Okay.
I think we need to come up with a new name. We'll have to work on that. See if people can come up with a better one.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone tuning in. This is Close to the Metal. This is our weekly show where we get in depth with computing. We talk about specific things that are happening. We've got several episodes up that you can watch on YouTube or listen via podcast. But today we're focusing on something very specific, and it has to do with the new Intel CPU, Kaby Lake. We're going to get into that. We're going to talk about the details of it, what's going on with it, where it's going, how it's different than what's come out before, and most importantly, if it's something you should upgrade to or when you should upgrade your CPU. So we'll get through to all of that, but while we're doing this, we want to hear your comments. We want to know what you think, what you want to talk about. If you have thoughts on this, if you're watching live via YouTube right now, go ahead and pop those in there into the side. If you're listening via podcast, you can always email afterward, but watching live is clearly the best. That's where you can find out. So go ahead and do that, and we'll follow through. I'm Greg Nibbler.
I'm Brad Burke.
So a lot of the DT crew is over in IFA right now in Berlin. So it is Brad and I that will be holding this down. And I'll be asking Brad a lot of questions because I'm going to be honest, I'm not as knowledgeable in this. And that's why I want your questions to pop up in there too. However, I can say this, Kaby Lake is a weird name for a processor.
Yeah, I agree. I think they should have. I think Skylake, to do it once, it was kind of nice and have that sort of tie-in. But I think they should have moved away from the Lake and said, like, we did Skylake, now let's do maybe even Canyon. They've been known to use Canyon sometimes for products. That would have been a good one to go back to.
Okay.
We just had the Skull Canyon, which was
Canyon.
a little computer.
That's great.
Great name for a computer. Even had a little skull on it.
Anything with skull is good.
Works for me.
Yeah. But no, they went with Kaby Lake. We don't even know where Kaby Lake is.
Yeah.
But that is the name. So let's talk about the actual processor itself. So where does this come in the pantheon of Intel processors?
So this is what they're calling their 7th generation chip. And that's not to say that like there's only been 7 generations of Intel processors at all. There's been many more, but this is what their core line. So that's started back in 2007 as the core chips, and this is the 7th iteration of that. The 6th being Skylake. So this is, it's not, we can kind of get into this, but it's not as big of a revision as we're used to seeing. This is what they're calling an optimization.
An optimization, so, okay. And when was the last update that we had?
Last update was last year. We had Skylake.
Okay.
And Skylake was a very substantial update to the platform. We saw new ranges of chips. We saw a bunch of new features, big power efficiency improvements. That was very much a move in a big move for Intel rather than, these sort of they go sort of back and forth, and that one was sort of one we got really excited about, one that we sort of started recommending to people once again, like, hey, this is a processor worth looking at, And
this was the Skylake last year.
Skylake, yeah. So we're seeing those in everything now, Those are everywhere.
Well, so with this Kaby Lake, which is just shipping now, right?
Yeah, so it's weird the way they do launches. So like they tell us about them, a year and a half in advance, and then they officially launch the chips. And what that means is basically that they've started sending them out to computer manufacturers. So, Dell, HP, Acer, Asus, Lenovo, all of them. They start receiving those chips in the mail, and so they can start building machines around them. They've had some, so they've been able to design them, but now they have like production numbers.
They've actually got the chips, so the newer computers can come out with these in them. So when would actually a consumer see this?
You'll start seeing them now. You'll start seeing at least high-end laptops before the end of the year. So especially that's where it's going to start is with these higher end chips. They're going to come out to laptops like, maybe, hopefully, please, September 7th in the new Apple MacBook Pros. It would be really, really, really great to see new processors in those. It's been like 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
And especially, companies like Dell, HP, Acer, Asus are all going to be on that really quickly in their sort of boutique $1,500 plus laptops.
Okay. Well, let's talk about then. Let's get in depth with Kaby Lake. Like, what is this with this new update, this new one they have? What are the features that we're looking at that are different than before, or what are they highlighting?
So the biggest, I think, the flashiest kind of update to this is going to be the new media engine, which is, I hate when companies put new. That's like their thing, It's the new media engine. So in 2 or 3 years, when we're still using it, well, what is it now? And then they have to come up with a different name.
Yeah, I used to work in radio. We put new on everything. It was new. The radio station I worked for was new for the entire 4 years I worked for it. So yeah, just put new on there. Yeah. But so their new media engine.
The new media engine, it basically takes a little chunk of integrated graphics processors and sets them aside. It recreates them somewhere else, so it's separate from the graphics processor.
Okay.
And it's just a small chunk of CPU that is only designed for 4K video decoding and playback and editing.
Okay.
So it's designed basically to take strain when you're doing one of those things. If you're editing a video, if you're trying to watch like a YouTube video in 4K, they were showing a system using only 10% of its CPU playing back a 4K video on YouTube, which is pretty cool. Like that's very, very low CPU utilization.
How does that compare to what they had previously?
I couldn't tell you
exact
numbers, but I will say that that's a really taxing thing to do on your processor, and especially if you're trying to handle that at a software level, which is another thing that these are providing hardware decoding versus software decoding. So rather than the computer sort of having to emulate this, there's a built-in chip. We saw this with HEVC. Or the M.265 or H.265 format with Skylake chips. We all of a sudden saw this massive performance gain when you were trying to decode things into basically MPEG formats because it was happening at a hardware level now.
Okay.
Yeah.
And and that is important with more and more programming going to 4K. Everything's going to 4K eventually, probably sooner than later.
Yeah.
Within the next year or so, you're going to see that as everywhere. Yeah. So new media engine. They've also got the slight performance boost.
There's a little bit of a performance boost. They're saying about 12% between, I think it was the i7 6500U and 7500U.
Okay.
And that's a fairly low power chip. That's the kind you might see in a in a mid-range to high-end laptop. I think it's a 35 watt power envelope, but I'm not sure about that, which is about half of a desktop power envelope.
All right, so a little bit of a boost there.
Just a little bit.
And then what else? Anything else big that's happening with it? Any big changes?
We're going to get better battery during that video playback as a result, so you're going to see a little bit of that. But the bigger thing is actually a shift in the way they're branding these processors. So sort of an interesting thing that there's different lines within this Intel Core unit. And there's what they call the Core I chips. And those are the ones we generally see in nicer laptops, mid-range laptops, even budget laptops, as well as desktops.
Okay.
If you buy something for a desktop, it's going to be a Core i3, i5, or i7, or something like a Pentium.
Like this is a Core i7, the one I'm using right now.
Right, and this is a Core, I think it's the Core i5. And that's, those are generally the standard chips. And then if you get down to a much lower power point, usually the 4.5 watt, which you start seeing, really, really thin laptops or sometimes like, mini computers and things like that, we use these M chips. And they used to be that they were a lot less expensive and they were a lot slower. Like the past couple generations were really like you took a big performance hit in exchange for like $50 or $100.
Yeah.
It was like, well, is this, what is this worth it? And we kind of waffled
I guess it depends on what you're doing with it.
Totally.
If you're just doing basic word processing or something like that, probably you could go with that low one, right?
Yeah, and that kind of stuff is fine if you're just like a, everyday user. And especially, we found that there are even lower power chips, the Atom chips, and we found those to be pretty much unusable.
Really?
We stopped reviewing laptops with those. Yeah, they, because things like, trying to just open a few tabs or like use a web browser.
Yeah.
Those things were slow, and you could feel it in a way that it was affecting people who weren't people like Matt and I who use fast computers all the time. And when I'm using a Core i3, I'm like, this is kind of slow, but no one else notices that. And this was the kind of thing where like people
would like normal people would,
they'd be like, I was trying to open notes and like read an email and it was slow.
And it was that bad.
It was that bad. But, the M chips provided a nice balance, and especially the last generation, they got a huge performance boost to them. We found that Core M chips were actually like much more usable, especially because of the Core M5 and M7 chips.
Okay.
So, it was the last generation at least was actually a lot better. And now the thing is that they're kind of doing away with them.
So they're getting rid of the Core M altogether?
The Core M, not really. The Core M5 and M7 chips are now going to be Core I chips. So they're
actually upgrading them to a regular
Right. But it's sort of their
Or how's
decision
that?
to do that, right?
Yeah.
Because there are these 3 chips, and they were able to say basically Core M3 chips are going to be Core M. So those are like the kind of lower end ones, and then Core M5 and M7 chips will be Core I chips if they perform like an i7. That's what the quote we got from Intel on that.
Okay. We do have a question
Yeah.
here really quick too, just to get to that, and I want to get back to this a little bit more about the Core M. Alvin asks, I'm a video editor looking for a new editing laptop. Is it true the 7th gen is optimized for 4K editing? He's a Premiere user. So
Yeah.
It is?
Yeah, so that's what we were talking about, the new media engine. Where
Sorry,
it's sort
did I
of,
say it weird? That look was so weird that you
oh
just
no,
gave me-
I was a little confused by the syntax. That's the whole thing, is that they've separated that 4K decoding process over to a specific part of the chip. So the rest of your CPU is free to do other sorts of editing and run whatever applications and effects and things like that you've got going, because the decoding is all being handled separately from that.
That's
so
great.
It's freeing up processor space.
And feel free to drop in whatever questions you have, whoever's watching right now. We want to get to those, so I'll ask Brad whatever it is that you've got going, and we'll go through that. One follow-up question to that: is it best to wait or just go with the Skylake? We'll get into that, I think, here in just a little bit.
Yeah, we will.
We're going to get into when you should upgrade, how you should upgrade, and what the timeline is for that. So we'll be hitting that up in a minute. So let's get to some. Well, actually, any more on the Core M that you wanted to hit before we?
So it's an interesting thing in that it's they're saying that basically their Core M5 and M7 chips are performing despite a 4.5 watt TDP. So that's the power envelope in which the chip runs, and that's I think the Core i7 full desktop size chips are 90 watts. So that gives you an idea of like just how low power these chips are, and them choosing to include them as I chips is sort of it's a question of like, well, is power efficiency just that good on Kaby Lake that these chips really are performing like their Core i5 and i7 counterparts, or is this Intel saying like, well, sometimes we could brand them this way? It's
just do it for that purpose only.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's an interesting question and an interesting move. So I'll be excited to get my hands on a 4.5 watt Core i7 and see what that chip looks like.
Yeah, see if it actually performs to that level. Well, let's talk about this as far as their Intel's normal way of improving their chips. And actually, I wanted you to maybe give a little detail on this as far as what this process is. So normally, the way they improve their chips is through a system called TickTock.
Yeah, the TickTock model.
Okay, can you explain, just give a brief explanation for TickTock? I'm sure a lot of you watching know this, but in case you don't, what Intel's TickTock model means.
So basically, Intel they create a new fabrication process. They create a new architecture at a certain size, and in this case, it started at 65 nanometers with the net burst architecture, which is very famous because it sort of introduced this model. And the way that worked is they created their chip, and then they said, we're going to shrink down our existing design into a smaller size. And that, shrinking your transistors doesn't just make your chip smaller, it also greatly improves your power efficiency because you don't need nearly as much.
Using a lot less power.
Yeah.
So they take that existing design and they shrink it.
They shrink it down.
And what's that? And
that's the tick.
Okay, so that's the part of tick.
Yeah.
So they'll put out a processor and then wait a little while and then shrink it down, and then that's their next evolution, and then that's what they put out. So that's a tick.
That's a tick.
Okay.
And then the talk is when they redesign that architecture. They make they still based off of all of these are still in some ways based off of NetBurst's original design, but they sort of revamp it. They add in new features. They change the way things are laid out to make it more apt for that size.
Gotcha.
So, the first time, they shrink it down, and then the talk is the redesign at that size.
So a tick is a shrink, a talk is a redesign.
Right. And then they take that design and they shrink it down.
And then that's another tick.
It just keeps
so
going.
It just keeps going. So how often do they do a tick and how often do they do a talk?
It's about one or the other every year or so.
Every year or so.
There's some, breaks where it goes off of that or it goes a little faster or slower.
Okay.
But yeah, it's generally been about once a year.
So the Kaby Lake, this one that just came out, would this be a talk or a tick?
This is a little confusing now because Skylake was a talk.
Okay, that was the last one that came out a year
on
ago.
the 14 nanometer process. So we started at 65 nanometers in 2007. We're down to 14 nanometers. And Skylake was the total redesign of the platform at that size.
Okay.
But after that, they were sort of unable to reach that next one fast enough. They weren't able to shrink down the Skylake architecture. They were having problems doing it. Their production partners were having problems with silicone that small. They have to switch to kind of a new process, too, from being these... We've gotten into this a little bit more, what they call FinFET. So it's a flat transistor versus sort of a... You have to have these breaks, these transistors in your chip, and it's sort of, instead of being like this, they're like this, which improves size. There's all these... It gets very complicated in ways that I don't even really... I have trouble with, but... Basically, they've decided now that they're going to what they call, I'm going to get this right, a process architecture optimization.
Okay, so they're abandoning TickTock?
They're abandoning the TickTock cycle. It's not, they're just not able to keep up anymore. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, we've got a banner up there if you're watching on YouTube right now.
So now what they're going to do is, instead of a tick, they'll introduce a new architecture. So that's still sort of a tick. Okay. And that they're saying, here's the new architecture, or here's the new process, and then the new architecture is when they shrink it down. Mm-hmm. And then once they shrink it down, they're going to have another one where they kind of figure it out again, where they sort of like tweak it. Or I'm sorry, I got that backwards, I think.
We're confusing ourselves. I mean, ultimately what it is, they're doing it a little bit different than they did before.
So they've just added, what they've done is they've added another step after the talk.
Okay.
Or in between the tick and the talk.
Okay. So there we go. Well, we'll leave that as it is. that was a lot to digest. You can look it up and find it if you want some more information. But let's move on here. So we've got a few more things we want to get to. And again, if you're watching on YouTube, we want to know what you think, or if you're listening via podcast, send us an email afterward, what your questions are, and we'll get to those. I think next, where we kind of talked about where these are going to show up, where we're going to see them first. And that's probably going to be in the laptops?
Yes, so they're going to be in laptops first. They're going out to partners. So we're going to start seeing, probably, like I said, major manufacturers are going to have their mid to high-end machines.
Okay.
And a lot of times what they'll do, even with a new chip, is they'll put out, like, one machine. They'll be like, this is the
high-end
HP Elite Z or whatever. And they'll say, like, this is our computer. I don't know if that's a real product. I don't think it's a real product.
With Kaby Lake.
With Kaby Lake. And they'll say, like, it has, like, and usually it's, like, the first chip is the, like, top-of-the-line chip. Okay. And that's like your like kind of, that's the introductory chip that like everybody's using.
Gotcha.
And then it'll sort of start filling out below that. So it'll start, I think probably the only chip they've named is that the i7-7500U. So I have a feeling you'll see that a bunch of places. And then you'll start seeing, other i7s, some other i5s, i3s, and then you'll start maybe seeing the M3s after that. It'll just kind of continue to cascade down.
Okay. So we'll see these as they start showing up in newer computers as we go on. But and let's get into this, and this is a question actually that was proposed in there. When is the right time to upgrade with this? I mean, we talked about there's been some improvements on this. The new media engine that's going to be there. There's a slight performance boost. And you're going to have a little bit better for battery improvement for video playback and some editing. So if you're looking for editing like Alvin was earlier, that might be the right way to go. But for other reasons, like what is the right time to upgrade?
Well, I think especially when you're talking about a laptop, it's a little different than you're talking about a desktop. And especially because with a laptop, if you want a new CPU, you sort of got to throw the whole thing out.
Yeah.
And that's, then you have to decide, is my processor old enough? Is my other hardware old enough? And, when you talk about gaming, things have to stay really current.
Yeah.
You have to, like most things can stay as they are, but you've got to keep upgrading that GPU. And when you're just an everyday user, things are a bit different. And you don't have to worry so much about the performance boost between generations. Intel generations is kind of negligible.
Okay.
It's 12% general productivity, sure, all that. But, in actuality, most users aren't going to notice this kind of... It's not like, oh my God, all of a sudden my internet browser is opening faster, my Excel is loading faster. Things like that aren't going to be hugely different.
It's not going to be a really noticeable difference with this upgrade.
Yeah. And even in enthusiast levels, in the desktop space, CPU upgrades don't happen that often. I mean, I'm running a third generation Intel processor at home, and I know Matt's got a fourth generation. Like this is, I have a newer graphics card than that. But the performance boost isn't what you're looking for, I think, when you're upgrading. You want to be much more looking at a feature set.
Okay.
So that would be like you're saying here, if you're someone who edits in 4K and you're going to buy a laptop with a 4K screen and edit, this might be the time to upgrade. That you might want to hold off on getting that Skylake chip because Kaby Lake is going to bring performance improvements for exactly that.
Okay.
You know.
And if you don't get it then you're probably waiting another year.
You're waiting another year,
then you're
and you
looking
know,
at a couple years.
Yeah, it's always just an incremental thing where you can decide: do I jump in at this one? Do I jump in at next one?
Okay, so like for Alvin in the chat there, like if he was looking to upgrade for 4K video editing, it'd be worth it probably the end of this year. Wait till the end of this year and wait
End
for
of
this
this
new
year,
Kaby
beginning
Lake.
of next year. Yeah, when you start seeing Kaby Lake. And he said he was asking about HQ chips. Those are the higher power wattage than the U chip, so it's like a kind of in between the desktop and the mid-range laptop, and they haven't really announced much in the way of those, but I have a feeling you won't see those until early next year.
Okay.
Probably the nicer HQ, HK, the unlocked chips, those will start popping up 6 months.
Okay.
In laptops at least, which is about the same time probably you'll see desktop chips, I think, as well.
Okay. All right. And let us know if you have any other questions too there. So we'll go ahead and get to those. But so moving along though with the upgrade, like you're saying the performance isn't as drastic or isn't as drastic of a change.
It's always incremental, I think, with these chips. You know, that seems to be the trend we see, is that it gets a little bit better each time, and yeah, that's going to be great.
Right.
But the performance for most users has been there. You know, I know people who game on an i7 950. You know, that's like an old chip. That's like a first generation i7, and it's fine. You know, it does just fine. And again, it's the feature support, especially that you're looking for. You know, if you're gaming, you want 4th generation or newer because it has VR support. Although some older 3 generation chips have it. You know, there's all these sorts of things. It just depends what you specifically are doing.
Well, now you as a gamer, you know, you game a lot, but with the added 4K support on this, is this something that you will want to upgrade to?
So that's sort of independent from gaming, because that's sort of it's just about video decoding. Okay. So the graphics engine that they're using in the Kaby Lake is pretty much the same. Yeah, exactly. The GPU is going to make a much bigger difference than what chip you're using. You know, I don't think you'd probably notice. You know, if we ran benchmarks with the new i7, you know, whatever, and the older the Skylake i7. You would probably see on paper a bit the difference they're talking about. You would see in our productivity benchmarks, oh yeah, it did 10, 15%. Better. If you put those processors in the exact same system and with the same graphics card, same RAM and everything, and you fired up a game benchmark, you're not likely to see more than a couple frames per second difference. Okay. That's the much bigger, when you really get down to it, these chips have been really at a good place for a while, and it is good to see that they're improving things that are quality of life improvements for a lot of people. We're seeing a lot of high-end laptops with big high-resolution displays, bigger than 1080p, bigger than 1440p, 3200 by 1800 or 4K, or in the case of this new Acer 21X. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah, I saw something about that.
21-inch curved gaming laptop. Yeah, that's and it's good to have these things because people they're watching movies, they're browsing the internet, they're working, and in those things you're going to see better battery life, you're going to see improved performance, and so then that might be the time to upgrade. If you're going to go with something on that end. All right, well, there we go. We've been talking about the Kaby Lake, the new Intel processor. The name still is not the greatest name in the world, but it is an improvement. You think you're going to stick with the Lake theme after this? I think they are. They have so after this, let's see, I had this open. Yeah, so this is Ice Lake. Or this is Kaby Lake. Next up, we've got 2 more Skylake chips, which are Coffee Lake and Cannon Lake. And then after that, we go to Ice Lake. Okay. So that's a smaller process. And Ice Lake is going to be Ice Lake and Tiger Lake. Tiger Lake. So they're sticking with Ice Lake. I think they've got another lake after Tiger Lake that they haven't told us about yet. They're going to milk the lakes for a little bit longer. Yeah, they're enjoying it. Well, there it is. If you are watching this on YouTube, go ahead and leave your comments too. We'll get to those. And thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in today. Brad, any final thoughts on Kaby Lake that you want to give people? We've kind of covered everything, but I just wanted to see if you had any. I would say your closing remarks, your final thoughts. If it were Jerry Springer, if you're looking at buying a laptop now, you should wait. Yeah, and I know people say that a lot. Well, technology moves a lot, but I think this is one of those cases where you're going to start seeing. It's the kind of thing where you could totally spend $1,500 on a laptop today, and in 2 weeks, that same model with a better processor is going to be $100 cheaper. This is totally so wait. Just wait, because if you were going to buy a laptop today, there's going to be a new version of it in the next 3 months. Do you think they'll be out by Christmas? You'll see a lot of them by Christmas. Okay, but definitely by early next year. They had some number they put out there. I can point to it here. It was ended by the end of the year. They were supposed to have a certain number of models.
But they'll be rolling out definitely by the end of this year.
Rolling out, yeah, by the end of the year.
So there it is. If you've got
over 100. They said over 100 models with the Kaby Lake by the end of the year. So
okay, well there it is.
lots of them.
Yeah, if you're looking to buy a laptop, hold off. Per Brad. That is the recommendation. All right. Well, thanks so much, everybody, for tuning in. We really appreciate this. We're on live Wednesdays at 10 a.m. Pacific time right here at digitaltrends.com, and now available via podcast as well. So it should be showing up in iTunes and Stitcher and everywhere. You can get podcasts, so you can get the audio version, or rewatch this, share it, tell your friends, join in, let us know your comments. If you have something you think we should be talking about, send us an email, podcast@digitaltrends.com. And thank you so much. We'll be back next week with another episode.